Okay, welcome back into this third chapter of the chapter on anaerobic speed and power reserve. Now we're discussing about the prescription side of the things, probably the most exciting aspect once we understand the screening and the evaluation of the reserve and the profiling. Now at the macro, so the largest level of programming. First important aspect of the thing is to understand, when I talk about macro, is more what type of high intensity interval training or what format might be the best suited for each of the different profile. So shall we offer more short intervals to speed profile, or shall we give them more long intervals, or shall we favor sprint interval training? What about the endurance profile? What do they cope with better, or what is better suited to them, sprint or long intervals? On that, we can have a look to this more recent study from Levens and Bélanger. And those guys did something, I would say, pretty simple, but very, very informative. And they kind of used two really clear types of athletes in this study. Athletes with predominantly slow twitch fibers, and another group of athletes which predominantly fast twitch fibers. And what did they do, those guys? They just asked them to repeat 3 times 30-second all out type of interval. So what we call in our jargon, the sprint interval training. So all out repeated Wingate. On the graph, you have the slow guys in black, and you see the power and how the power decreases throughout the 30 seconds, but also how the power evaluates or changes throughout the 3 repetitions. So the black dots, the slow guys, as you can see, there's kind of of course, a drop in power throughout the 30 seconds, but you could almost superimpose, put each power curve on the top of each other for the 3 sprints. That means that they had a drop, but the drop is similar. And importantly, they start every time at the same time. That means that those 4-minute rest in between allowed them to completely recover the power, so that when they had to repeat the second and the third, they started back to the same level of power. So again, that shows that the endurance profile are definitely able to recover and to kind of, they're just machine to repeat the same type of work. If you look at now in the white dots, so the fast guys, so in this case, our speed profile, without a surprise, they started with a faster and a higher power of the first sprint than the endurance guys, because that's obviously their profile. But you can see the slope of the decrease of the white dots is way steeper, because starting faster or more powerful, they ended up at the same level as the slow guys. But the more interesting as well is that if you look at 4 minutes after, their first sprint is already less powerful than the first. And the third sprint, again, they start with a lower level. That means that for those guys, the 4 minutes were not enough for them to recover their power potential. And as well, they were just getting more tired, and there's a tendency for the slope to be steeper and steeper. So that just really shows that those guys, they are, in contrast to the others, they're just not made at all to repeat. And when we ask them to repeat with the same constraint as the slow guys, they just don't do it well. They just definitely, they are just not just impossible to repeat their performance throughout the time. So that's pretty simple. But again, that just shows the clear picture of those 2 types of opposite profile, the endurance and the speed profile. Further information from those studies, you see, before I was showing around what happens when they have only 4 minutes of rest between the exercises. In this case, once they had finished this very intensive session of the 3 Wingates all out, they looked at their maximal voluntary contraction capacity and see how much their strength will drop at the end of the session and how long they would need to recover their full strength over a period of 5 hours. In this case, again, the black dots are the slow guys. As you see, the session is over. They have lost only 5% of the strength, and in less than an hour, strength is back to normal. If you look now at the speed guy, the fast guys, they've lost more than 20-25% of the strength because of this Wingate session. And after 5 hours, they're still not back to where they were before the session. So before was really the short term, the 4-minute recovery. This is a kind of a medium to term, like a 4, 5, 6 hours of recovery. Again, the speed guys, the fast guys, they're just not made to do those kind of intensity. I mean, they're made for that, but they just don't recover. They need so much more time to be able to recover. And again, as we understand this, we definitely understand that, first of all, at the overall level, we can't ask them to do as much as the others in terms of overall load, but also we can't ask them to do, or we need to adapt or understand that if we ask them to do the same as the slow guys, they're going to struggle and they're going to need way more time to recover. And that's really a key point, understanding the profiles about those guys. So if you think about what are those guys, let's say, made for, or what will be the type of hit, the format of hit sequences that they will be kind of comfortable with, that they could do well. Continuous submaximal type of exercise, endurance, they're kind of made for that. The sprint guys forget, and then the hybrid, yes, why not, you know? Long intervals, that's definitely for the endurance guys. That's definitely not for the speed guys. Short interval, I would say everyone is kind of do it, but there is a preference for the hybrid that are, let's say, at their ease for both on the speed and aerobic side of the things. Repeated sprints, in this case, that's definitely something that the speed and the hybrid guys are kind of comfortable and made for, because they can use their speed and they don't use the full reserve. So there's something that they can cope with. And then the sprint interval training, same stuff, same idea, with probably a bit of a better, again, tolerance and preference for the hybrid that can cope and with the short recovery, better than the speed that might miss a little bit of this metabolic capacity. So just based on that, I think then you can start to think, okay, which are my athletes, in which bucket shall I put them? So using the ratio and just this simple quadrant as I had before. And once you have them in this bucket, you can then start to prescribe different levels or different types of or different formats when it comes to those different groups. So those guys, they're going to do more repeated sprint training. Those guys, they're probably better suited to do long intervals and so on. It's pretty simple, but again, it's just an overall process that I don't think is completely neither admitted or integrated in everyone's habits or routines when it comes to conditioning players in team sports. As I said, on purpose, I wanted to show you pretty old videos back from my days when I was starting to play with this. So that's images from 2006, I would say. And in this case, players kind of split it in between groups based on their profile as well. So you have a bunch of guys on the left side doing repeated sprints, so more hybrid and speed profile. And on the other side, you have more slow and endurance profiles doing short interval. So of course, because it's handball, because it's indoor, I never went, especially in season, to putting the slow guys, the endurance guys, into the extreme of long interval. But at least they were working for longer duration than the rest of the group, which was doing definitely more sprint and repeated sprint type of work. A bit in the same veins, comparing in this case, putting players doing kind of long intervals in a format of small-sided games, majority of players, but then here, really slow type of profile. Endurance needed a boost, a continuous boost to make sure they get their dose. Those guys may not always were not able to get their dose when they're playing. So for different reasons linked to the importance of the players and making sure they really get something linked to their profile, we're often having them doing some extra work on the side in a format of in this case long-ish intervals, like about a minute in this case on the side of the field. Other ways to individualize and fine-tune those intervals. You have examples on the bike here. Here we have a kind of repeated sprint, but long sprint. This is a 20-second on and something like 40 to 40 seconds off. So kind of a more sprint interval training. Here, that would be the example of a long interval on a bike, 2-3 minutes. So this is definitely more like a team sport athlete. Doing those repeated, very short and intense sprints. While here we have definitely an endurance profile that does long interval. And here, when you see all those hybrid type of profile that you see a lot in rugby, where those guys are very fit but also very strong and fast, this is where people do a lot of kind of almost CrossFit kind of mixed, where there's a lot of neuromuscular constraint as well as some metabolic load. So that will be, back to our HIIT types. There's a lot of types 4 where you kind of hit all the targets, but it's really based on very short and explosive movement, and that works very well for the speed and the hybrid profile that you see a lot in rugby, for example. And again, last example of spreading and putting different players in different buckets. Again, that's even older than the previous images. That's back to 2002 or maybe 2003, where you could see at least 3 groups of players doing different types of work, again, based on their profile. The 2 guys on the bike doing longer intervals, they are definitely the endurance type of profile. Then someone more in a type of a mix hybrid profile doing short intervals, while in the back the guys were doing repeated sprints and so on. So this is completely up to you how many groups you can do. I mean, at least 3 groups, because if you have those 3 profiles, and then within each profile you can still play with different types and formats to make sure everyone gets his dose, but also the dose that suits the best to his own profile. All right, and now looking at an even higher macro level, so not talking now about the types of exercise and the HIIT formats that are the most appropriate for those guys, we can look at the overall loading and how much those guys can tolerate depending on their profile. And to have an idea about that, we can dive into those really cool results from the team of Phil Bellinger. And in this case, they've done, like I said, something pretty nice. They've looked at, first of all, they took a bunch of middle distance runners and they trained them baseline for a couple of weeks. Then they overloaded them for another 3 weeks. And before and after this overload period, they did a time trial, time to exhaustion. So they had to run as long as possible at a given high intensity speed. At the same time, they also profiled those players, those runners, based on their gastrocnemius carnosine content. This is definitely related to muscle fiber type, and in this case, the lower the carnosine content, the higher the proportion of fiber type 1, and then those kind of endurance profile. So if you look at this graph, you see now a correlation, the association between the fibers profile of those guys. So on the left, with a negative Z-score, you have the endurance profile. On the right side, with a positive Z-score, you have the speed profile. And what do we see is that in between the before and after the heavy workload that those guys were exposed to, the endurance type of guys with a lower carnosine content, they even tended to improve their performance, the time to exhaustion. While the speed guys, after these 3 weeks of overload, they kind of lost performance and they had a decreased performance. So what's the conclusion of this excellent study is that it simply shows that if you give the same workload to athletes, to runners with different profiles, they might respond completely differently. And in this case, the endurance guys benefited from the overload so that they had an improved performance even acutely, while the speed profiles guys that was definitely too much for them, and they could not cope with that similar load, and they ended up by a reduced performance. So pretty simple, I would say, type of pretty simple study in the terms of what they're going to show. But in the end, the results are incredibly helpful, and they definitely show that whatever the profile you have to be mindful about the load that you can cope, and the more endurance profile you are, the more the load you can cope with, and vice versa. So a bit of a summary of that again, back from result from the same paper. So as you can see, slow typology, so the kind of endurance type of guys, and now we look at ability to cope with large training volume, pretty large. In intermediates, that's our hybrid profile, intermediate tolerance to load. Fast typology, fast type of players, small tolerance to load. And again, that makes me think about also how do we train players and the approach in terms just of what's the duration of a session. You have typical European, North European type of player. They can cope with session by an hour 30, an hour 2 hours. Now you get other types of players, way more explosive. You may have more African-born types of player with really, really fast, a lot of fast switch fibers. Those guys, probably worth training them an hour only and go through the quality and the speed, but you might not need to increase the volume as for the first group, for example. I think that makes a lot of sense, And there's pretty kind of a similarity in between what we've just talked about, the overall, the macro level about the training load volume. But you think about that's back what we discussed in the first part of the chapter about the ability to recover between intense training session. So the endurance guys, they can recover quickly between sessions, while the speed guys, they need long recovery between sessions. Training morning versus afternoon will not impact the same way those different profiles. And then even more at the micro level, recovery within a session. So between one set and another, one rep and another. The endurance guys, they recover quickly. The speed guys take them longer. So that's kind of a summary of what we just discussed about the profiling, both at almost the task, the sequence level, up to on the top to the macro and the overall load level. I guess that's pretty interesting. So again, summarizing this, that's now our 3 typical profiles. Here we have the endurance, loading tolerance, because of this low level of carnosine and this kind of stuff, can cope with a lot of load. Speed profile, not much load. Hybrid, probably a bit of both. And that's it for his chapter. I'll see you in the last closing chapter. Thank you.